Previously on the Martskis, Andrew took his pet elephant ducks for a walk.
Hey guys. See you later.
Come on, hippocampus, get with the program.
You just talked to your hippocampus? That's kind of weird.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out a 4-letter word for radiator emission, but I can't because my hippocampus is malfunctioning.
Oh, you mean the structure in the limbic system that plays a central role in the formation of long-term memories.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, why don't you have some chips? The salt will help your neurotransmitters to fire faster. Neurotransmitters being chemicals that are released from a nerve cell, which thereby transmit an impulse from a nerve cell to another nerve, muscle, organ, or other tissue, of course.
Why are you talking like that?
Like what?
Like a nerd.
What do you mean? I talk like this all the time. Time being the indefinite continued progress of existence and events in the past, present, and future regarded as a whole. If you think I'm saying all these definitions for the benefit of some audience that we can't see, well, that's totally not what I'm doing.
Okay. Now my cerebellum isn't communicating with my somatic nervous system.
And by cerebellum, you mean the part of the brain that controls muscles to execute skilled body movements and... What are you calling?
I'm calling the neurologist to schedule an MRI. For you. Welcome to Quarter 1, Week 3, the instructional video. We are going to be talking about the brain and neuroscience. Neuroscience refers to the psychological study of the brain and how the brain mentally, or the mind, and physically, i.e. the brain, control and regulate behavior and of course thinking. In this instructional video, we are only going to discuss just the basic components of how the brain operates, and then we'll talk about two other systems that the brain closely works with, and that's the central nervous, or the nervous system, and the endocrine system. In our readings and in the links and the discussion board assignment, you'll dig deeper into the topic of neuroscience. All right, so the first thing that we want to talk about is the brain. Basically, the brain is, the physical aspects of the brain allow for the mental processing of the mind. And so some neuroscientists look only for the mind and the brain. Other psychologists and psychiatrists make a clear distinction between the brain and the mind. But we do want to study the physical components of the brain because it does physically control all behavior that our bodies do. One thing to understand is that the brain works by sending and receiving messages to the rest of the body via neurons, and you can see a picture of an actual neuron here. This spidery looking image is a neuron, and the brain is made up of millions and millions, if not billions, of neurons. The nervous system is made up of millions of neurons, so neurons are a very, very important part of understanding how the brain operates and controls the body, and so we're going to discuss that first. All right, so here we have more detailed picture illustration of neurons, two neurons. Those are nerve cells, and all neurons are going to have a dendrite, which is right here. It is going to have a cell body, this part right here, and it's going to have an axon, this long tail right here. The axon is going to connect to other neurons through the synaptic cleft, or the synapse, which you can see right here. You can't really see the space in between the end of this axon and the next nerve cell, but in the inset you can see that synapse. So basically, When triggered by sensory information, basically when our five senses, smell, taste, touch, sight, and I can't think of the other one. Sorry, brain fart. My neurons aren't working quick enough today. When triggered by sensory information that we get from our senses, an electric nerve impulse is fired to the brain via the body's millions of neurons. These nerve impulses will always travel from the axon of one neuron to the dendrite of another neuron. And you can see that here, this arrow, blue arrow, is illustrating the electrical signal that is traveling down this axon down to the dendrites of another neuron. When the electrical nerve signal reaches the synapse, that is the space right here that you see, between the axon of one cell and the dendrite of another, the chemicals called neurotransmitters, represented by these circles right here, when those neurotransmitters are fired, they're fired when the electrical signal reaches the neurotransmitters at the end of the axon. They're fired across the synaptic cleft, and they're received by receptor sites of dendrites of another nerve cell. Dendrites only receive neurotransmitters that fit their receptor sites, and that is how different kinds of medicine like Tylenol or Claritin alleviate symptoms like pain and allergies. They're actually tricking your nerve signals into blocking those messages of pain or the allergen stimuli that's making your allergies flare up. They're blocking those nerve impulses and neurotransmitters. So your brain doesn't think that your body is in pain or doesn't think that it's responding to allergies. Those messages never get to the brain. All right, the next thing that we're going to talk about is going to be the different parts of the brain. And different nerve impulses are received by different parts of the brain depending on what the functioning of the brain is. These different parts include things that you'll read about in the text, like the amygdala, the hippocampus, the medulla, etc., the different lobes in the brain. And you definitely want to check out the readings for very detailed information on the structure of the brain. We're not going to reiterate that here. We're just going to look at a few things in depth. Very briefly, the text will be more in depth. The big idea that I want you to get from this instructional video, besides understanding how neurons send nerve impulses to the brain, and the brain sends those messages back through the nerves, is that there are different parts of the brain that receive those nerve impulses. The brain will interpret the nerve impulses and then, like I just said, send appropriate response instructions to the rest of the body via those neurons, those nerve cells that are the highway system of the body. So this interpreting that the brain does is called perception, and we're going to talk more about perception and sensory information, how the brain interprets information coming from your five senses in quarter 2, week 5. We are going to talk now about the different lobes of the brain. So first I want to talk about the parietal lobe. Basically, the parietal lobe is where a lot of that interpreting that the brain does occurs. It also classifies objects into different groups and helps you to recognize that a heart is a heart, or a chair is a chair. It helps you figure out the spelling of words. It helps you figure out things like arithmetic, knowing your numbers. It's responsible for processing that visual spatial information, so knowing how far my computer screen is from my face is processed by my parietal lobe. Next, we're going to talk about the occipital lobe. This is the area of the brain that is responsible for interpreting all of that sensory information that's coming from our eyes. It processes what our eyes see. It identifies things like color, shape, size of everything that's coming into our brains. The cerebellum is not actually one of the lobes of the brain. There are only 4 lobes. The cerebellum is part of the the hindbrain, which is this purple section right here, and this orange brain stem. The lobes are all in the forebrain. But we do want to talk about the cerebellum right now. Basically, that is like when I was talking about in our skit, I said, oh, my cerebellum is not communicating with the somatic nervous system, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. Basically, the cerebellum is in charge of our gross and fine motor skills, so anything that we do, picking up a pen, swinging a bat, spiking a volleyball, anything that has to do with hand-to-eye coordination, helping us with our balance, all of that is regulated by the cerebellum. Next, we'll briefly talk about the brain stem, which is a little bit cut off. I apologize about that. Thought I moved up the video high enough, but I guess I didn't. So basically, the brain stem is where our pons and medulla are. It regulates the body temperature, the heart rate, your swallowing, your breathing, etc. So some of those more basic functioning that our body does is controlled by the different parts that are in the brain stem. Right, we're moving on to another part of the temporal lobe, another part of the brain, which is called the temporal lobe. Basically, that's where the memory is processed, events are stored, they're interpreted, stored. That's where we do our understanding of language processing, where we recognize faces, hearing. The brain, or the temporal lobe, is responsible for interpreting all of that information that's received through our ears. There's also some visual interpreting that's going on there. That's where we're not just hearing language, but we're also able to speak language because of our temporal lobe, and we also feel and show emotion, interpret emotions with our temporal lobe. The last lobe is one of the largest lobes. It is in the front of the brain, hence called the frontal lobe. This is where our logical, rational, critical thinking comes through. This part of the brain is not fully developed until you're an adult. This is where the thinking, planning, problem solving, again, there's more with emotions, behavioral control of your emotions, behaviors, decision making occurs here. So when we looked at that picture of the brain on the first part of this video, his frontal lobe is so huge because he's just so smart and he's just so logical and rational as he schemes to take over the world. Alright, so next we're going to talk a little bit about brain hemispheres and a little bit about split brain research. Again, refer to the text for more information on that. But up here, let me just move back. Sorry about that. I just want to point out this model of the brain. The different lobes are different colored. On this picture, you only think that the 4 lobes and the cerebellum, the brain stem, are only half of the brain. Actually, this is the brain stem right here. Here's the cerebellum. You can see that it goes over the full brain on both halves of the brain, both hemispheres of the brain. We have our temporal lobes and occipital lobes right here. You can't see the parietal lobe because it is hidden by the temporal and occipital lobes, but you can see the frontal lobe up here. Alright, so with split brain research, basically that's the idea that one half of your brain is responsible for another thing and the other half of your brain is responsible for something else. Some people might say, oh, I'm really logical and analytical, so I'm left brain, and the right brain, if you're right brain, you might say you're more perceptive and intuitive, creative, etc. There is some truth to that, but the more that neuroscientists research how the brain processes information and shares information, we know that that the brain will send signals across the corpus callosum, which is that thin part of the brain that separates the 2 hemispheres. It's not marked out on here, but you can imagine a line, the corpus callosum, going through this part of the brain, and that's it. When signals cross that, the brain is sharing information. So you can't just say that the left brain is strictly verbal and analytic and the right brain is strictly perceptual and intuitive. because they actually share information with each other, so the whole brain knows what's going on. So everybody should have elements of having good perception and intuition and being able to think through things analytically. But when we talk about how the hemispheres do differ in function, we're talking about how their abilities to perform very narrow specific tasks are localized maybe to one side of the brain versus the other. These are very, very specific and localized tasks, not very general things like analyzing information or having intuitive feelings about somebody that you see on the street or something like that. All right, next we're going to move on to the nervous system. You can see here with these colors that there are different parts of the nervous system, so we'll talk about them now. Basically, the brain works with two other operations in the body to regulate behavior, the nervous system and the endocrine system. We'll talk about the endocrine system next. So the nervous system is made up of two parts, the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. It's also made up of the peripheral nervous system, which is all of the remaining nerves in the body. The peripheral nervous system, or PNS, can be further broken down into two other parts. First of all, there's the somatic nervous system. That's what controls our voluntary muscle movement. Remember we just mentioned that that part of the nervous system is going to communicate with the cerebellum to coordinate that muscle, hand-eye coordination, balance, etc. So when I pick up my coffee cup, my somatic nervous system is working with my cerebellum to make sure that my coffee cup gets to my mouth and not spill everywhere all over my computer. All right, so the autonomic nervous system is what controls the unconscious body functions, like how our organs operate, like our heart breathing or our spleen working or whatever. So those automatic unconscious functioning of the body is controlled by the autonomic system. We do have two more important parts of the nervous system to consider, and that's the sympathetic nervous system, which mobilizes the body's response to stress. We also have the parasympathetic nervous system, which calms the body down after responding to that stressful situation. So when we talk about, fight or flight symptom or responses, those are the two nervous systems that are coordinating that. The sympathetic nervous system will coordinate that attack, like that fight or flight response, and then the parasympathetic nervous system is what calms down our body after we've responded to that situation. Next, we're going to talk about the endocrine system. The endocrine system is the brain, is the other operation that the brain works with to regulate behavior. And basically, the endocrine system is a system of glands that secrete hormones that regulate behavior, feelings, thoughts, organs. They also control your physical growth and development. So here is a chart where you can see the different types of glands and where they're located in the body. We have the pineal gland, the pituitary gland, the thyroid gland, the thymus, adrenal gland, pancreas, ovaries, and testes. We have a list of all the gland names right here. We have a list of all the hormones that they produce, and we also have a list of all of the things that those hormones do. A couple of things that I'm going to highlight are the pituitary gland. That's kind of like the master gland of the body. It helps control growth of bones and muscles. It controls the development of ovaries and testes. Ovaries are obviously in women going to control their ovulation and develop the physical features that distinguishes women from men. It also prepares the uterus for uterus lining for receiving an embryo. And then the testes are what produce testosterone that controls sperm production and also gives men those physical features that distinguish them from women. Another really important gland is your adrenal gland. That's what your sympathetic nervous system is going to be working with to prepare your body for emergency responses. It does things like increase heart rate, your breathing, etc. Your thyroid, you might hear a lot of people talk about having a thyroid gland problem, and that controls your metabolism, and it also helps promote growth. So those are some of the more pretty important glands that the assignments specifically talk about. This is the last part of our video, so before you head out, when you complete that application assignment, make sure you're paying attention to whether the question is asking about a part of the brain, whether it's asking about the nervous system or the endocrine system, because as you can see from this video, the brain, the endocrine system, and the nervous system all work together to control a lot of the same physical behaviors, the same mental processing, etc. So it seems like one answer might be more correct, but you got to make sure that you know if the question is asking about the brain versus the endocrine system versus the nervous system. Thank you for watching this, and if you have any questions, feel free to call me or email me. My extension is 3112, or you can pop in to collaborate. Thanks.